Kids swarming around me, and then I'm thinking fish scale that fills boot.
Hello, everybody. This is Sharonda, and this is my podcast as well as my YouTube channel, Spiritual Sense. This particular YouTube channel, I go over things in regards to the paranormal, such as pagan belief systems and practices, religious practices. I also go over topics such as hauntings, demonology, near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. I also incorporate tarot card reading into this podcast as well. And so for today, which is December the 12th, which is a Sunday, I am going to speak on the religion and the beliefs of voodoo. Okay. I did do a podcast episode as well as a webinar episode, no, a podcast episode on the belief and the religion of voodoo. I want to say it's been about almost 2 years now, and where I did a little bit more, extensive research for my personal knowing on the belief and the practice of voodoo. Now, from my understanding, Voodoo is a religion and the practice is hoodoo. So those are two different things, and I will briefly go over that today in regards to voodoo versus hoodoo. Okay. Now, so I'm on a website, and I'm going to try not to read verbatim the information that is on the website. But it says voodoo is a monotheistic religion that is often misunderstood. It is common in Haiti, New Orleans. It's a merge between the Catholic and African beliefs to form a unique set of rituals that include voodoo dolls and symbolic drawings. Any religion, as any religion, followers of voodoo cannot be lumped into a single category. There are also many misconceptions about this religion, voodoo. So I'm going to go into a little bit more information about understanding voodoo. It says it's a syncretic religion that combines Roman Catholicism and Native African religion, particularly from the religion of Dahomey or Dahomey region of West Africa. Um, so it says that it's primarily practiced in Haiti, New Orleans, and other locations within the Caribbean. It began with the African slaves that were um, brought into the United States or America, during the slave trades. Um, so it was frowned upon. Essentially, it was what the article is saying here is that their practices was frowned upon, meaning it was not kosher or wasn't right, and they did not it was unacceptable. Their beliefs and their practices was deemed unacceptable, and so when they began to during the slave trade, once they integrated over or was brought over uh, during the transatlantic slave trade, they began to incorporate Catholicism with the religion, is what it indicates here. Um, as well as Catholic saints, is what it has mentions. Um, so it says they perform their rituals using items and imageries of the Catholic Church. Okay, so some of the misconceptions about voodoo. Um, it mentions that oftentimes people associate voodoo with worship, devil worship, torture, cannibalism, and malevolent magical workings. This misconception has been perpetuated by, Hollywood or, the entertainment industry, about the understanding of their faith. Um, so,
Plus, Enema helps skin get clearer in psoriatic arthritis. Ask your doctor about Enema so we can get that.
So it says they refer to, by being monotheistic, they refer to a deity known as Bundy, or the god, the good god. They do accept the existence of lesser beings, which they call Loa or Iwa. It says these less relevant deities are more intimately involved in day-to-day life than Bundy, who is a remote figure. The Iwa are divided into three families, which is Rada, Petro, and Gedi. The relationship between humans and Awa is a reciprocal one. Believers provide food and other items that appeal to the Awa in exchange for their assistance. The Awa are frequently invited to possess a believer during rituals so the community can directly interact with them. So it says Belokin is the home of the Iwa as well as the deceased. It is commonly described as a submerged and forested island. It is guarded by the Awa Legba, who must be appeased before practitioners can speak to any other Vilokan resident. So in terms of rituals and practices, it says there is no standardized dogma within Voodoo. Two temples within the same city might teach different mythologies and appeal to the Awa in different ways. As such, the information provided in overrules of Voodoo. Um, so essentially, what this article is saying, it's kind of hard to give an account of what exactly voodoo is because no two people practices the same way. It's all, I guess, based on what an individual or a group of individuals who are in agreement with each other was deemed it to be, so to speak. So, you know, the true core believers, I'm going to just give my own, hypothetical answer to that. The true core believers in voodoo may not intended it in the manner that is being portrayed mass communications wide or via entertainment industry. And as we all know, people that are in agreement, you're not going to indulge all of your secrets and your prizes that God gives to you. So some things go without saying. Of course, you're going to what? Keep a lot of those things on the inside. So who truly and honestly know, what exactly the practice of voodoo is? Okay. So, and it says, and for example, sometimes our are associated with different families, Catholic saints or beeves. Some common variations are included here. So in terms of animal sacrifice, you have a variety of animals might be killed during the voodoo ritual, depending upon the Iwa being addressed. It provides spiritual sustenance for the Awa, while the flesh of the animal is then cooked and eaten by participants. So, in this instance, such as that, animal sacrifice, well, we go to the butcher shop, we go to the store who has butchers that butchers animals. Is that any more differently than what this right here describes? So it could very well be a play on the intellect and a test, on, how a person does and how they feel about things and what they're capable of doing. It's essentially what I'm gathering from that. Okay, so we have these. Rituals commonly involve the drawing of certain symbols known as beads with cornmeal and another powder. Each Iwa has its own symbol, and some have multiple symbols associated with them. We also have listed here voodoo dolls. The common perception of a voodoo incense poking pins into voodoo dolls does not reflect traditional voodoo. However, a lot of voodoo incense to do delicate dolls to particular awa and use them to attract awa's influence. So I'll just give you an example as to what my professional take on that. You may not necessarily like you may see practitioners of voodoo or who call themselves practitioners of voodoo may actually take a voodoo doll or a doll or whatever and put the pins and needles in it, and or whatever the case may be. So you may have that, but in my opinion, it could be a representation of whatever is transpiring, like a communication type of item or vessel as to what is going on in what direction, where to focus your attention to in a given situation. So that's my take on that. Okay. Now we're going to proceed to hoodoo because before when I did my presentation, well, I don't think I did a presentation. I think I did a podcast where I went over voodoo as well as hoodoo to get a more or less more insight on voodoo and hoodoo. So before I go into hoodoo, I'm going to proceed to see if I'm able to get a little bit more information on the religion of voodoo. So I am on a website and I'm going to read what it has here in regards to voodoo. And it's extensive. It has a lot of information here. I'm gonna try not to read everything verbatim. Try to sum it up for you. So, but voodoo, it mentions that I'm assuming this is a certain different type of voodoo because it mentions about and bear with me because when you begin to speak on spirits, those spirits will make themselves apparent. Okay, and I leave it at that. So it says it's a traditional Afro Haitian religion. It represents a syncretism of the Western African Voodoo religion and Roman Catholicism by the descendants of the Homian, Congo, Yoruba, and other ethnic groups who had been enslaved and transported to colonial Saint Dominique, and partly Christianized by Roman Catholic missionaries in the 16th and 17th centuries. The word voodoo means spirit or deity in the Fon language of the African kingdom of Dahomey. Okay, so before I go any further, I'd like to state that this podcast, as well as this webinar presentation, is for entertainment purposes. That means you are here because you have some, inquisitive knowledge about the religion or the practice of voodoo as well as hoodoo. Okay. I am not here to judge anyone's belief system. I may give an account. That's just my personal opinion on it. I don't discriminate against anybody because of their belief and or practice. You believe and practice what you choose within means what you practice. Okay. Um also when you begin to I do know this, okay, just like something just, I understand things are going to happen, but when you begin to entertain those spirits, you would notice that oftentimes they will show up. And I'll leave it at that. Okay. And that could be in the physical sense as well as on a spiritual sense. I do feel as though those spirits can inhabit us in a physical sense as well. Okay. And I'll leave it at that. So for no point in time am I discriminating against anybody in their belief systems and practices. This is strictly for entertainment purposes. Okay. So now we're going to go a little further. It says voodoo is a worldview encompassing philosophy, medicine, justice, and religion. Its fundamental principle is that everything is spirit. And now I do believe it. Humans are spirits who inhabit the visible world. The unseen world is populated by Iwa, which are spirits, Miste, or mysteries, and Vizib, the invisible, Zanji, angels, and the spirits of ancestors and the recently deceased. All these spirits are believed to live in a mythic land called Jenin, a cosmic Africa. The God of the Christian Bible is understood to be the creator of the universe and the spirits. The spirits were made by God to help him govern humanity and the natural world. The primary goal and activity of voodoo is to Sivi Iwa, serve the spirits, to offer prayers and perform various devotional rites directed at God and particular spirits in return for health protection and favor. And I have no, I have no problem with that, because I do that. I began to realize that, these spirits are still around, like of loved ones, that have passed on, friends and families alike. They're still around, they still visit us, and they would make themselves apparent. Like they do have the ability to infiltrate in our time and our space. And a lot of times people tell you, you watch too much. This is God letting you know this is it. What was being presented for you is it. Many of times, if you see mockery come into place, because everybody are not accepting of that notion about spirit and spirituality, because they don't want to give power to it, because you don't want the unseen to take force in your life. It's simple as this. Like whenever you begin to give power to something or acknowledge something, or put something up or forefront, put it on a pedestal or put it on the forefront, it will begin to mishandle that power. So we know that it is real, but many times we don't want to what? Give power to it, meaning we don't want to acknowledge it. We don't want to hand over control to it, but it's real. Okay, so it says the God, all these spirits are believed to live in a mythic land called Jenin, a cosmic Africa. The God of the Christian Bible is understood to be the creator of both the universe and the spirits. The spirits were made by God to help him govern humanity and the natural world. The primary goal and activity of Voodoo is to Sivi Iwa, serve the spirits, to offer prayers and perform various devotional rites directed at God and particular spirits in return for health, protection, and favor. Spirit possession. plays an important role in Afro-Haitian religion, as it does in many other world religions. During religion rites, believers sometimes enter a trance-like state in which the devotee may eat and drink, perform stylized dances, give supernaturally inspired advice to people, or perform medical cures or special physical feats. These acts exhibit the incarnate presence of Ilwa within the entrance devotee. That is so true. And a lot of people will say that you are possessed by a demonic spirit. That could very well be true as well, but we don't want to give power to that. We want to be possessed by the spirit of a good cause. We want to be possessed by a favorable spirit, particularly if you're under the knife of, God forbid, a surgeon or a practitioner or whomever, and for your health. You want to believe in a favorable supreme being and that he works in your favor is what you want. Okay. So we don't want to get beside ourselves and think that it's not under the guidance of God. Now, with that being said, and chances where, God forbid something turns out to be unfavorably, well, what do you say then? It's still, in my opinion, under the guidance of God. Even if, things did not turn out favorably, it's still under the guidance of God, in my opinion. Now, of course, people don't want to, admit to that or don't want to acknowledge that because, you don't want people who make mistakes to use an excuse as to bad behavior or not doing the best that they can do. So I can understand if a person chooses to go against that reason or that understanding. I can understand that. And I can understand the reasoning behind when they say separate church from state, meaning logic from spiritual. We're going to deal in what we can see versus what we cannot. So I can understand that. Okay. Now let me proceed. So it also mentions about Voodoo ritual activity, prayer, song, dance, and gesture is aimed at refining and restoring balance and energy in relationships between people and the spirits of the unseen. Voodoo is an oral tradition practiced by extended families that inherit familial spirits along with the necessary devotional practices from their elders. In the cities, local hierarchies of the priestesses or priest, which is Mambo and Ongan, children of the spirits, Onsi, and ritual drummers, Ontogi, comprise more formal societies or congregationals, society in these congregations. Knowledge is passed on through a ritual of initiation, Kenzo, in which the body becomes the site of spiritual transformation. There is some regional differences in ritual practice across Haiti, and branches of the religion include Rada, Daomi, Ibo, Nego, Deriao, Manding, Pekwo, and Congo. There is no centralized hierarchy, no single leader, and no official spokesperson. But various groups sometimes attempt to create such official structures. There are also secret societies called Bizengo and Sampedwell that perform a religio jurisdictional function. So there's a calendar of ritual feasts syncretized within the Roman Catholic calendar. It provides a yearly rhythm of religious practice. Important Iwa are celebrated on Saint's Day. For example, Ogu On St. James Day, July the 25th, Izili Dainto. On the Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, July the 17th, Dambala. On St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, and the spirits of the ancestors on All Saints Day and All Souls Day, November the 1st and 2nd. Many other familiar feasts for the sacred children, for the poor, for the particular ancestors, as well as initiations and funerary rituals occur throughout the year. So that is some very interesting information in regards to the voodoo religion. That, oftentimes, when we see things in regards to, when we're watching in Hollywood and things like that, that's a mockery of what you, to get you to identify if you're dealing with truth versus false, and how a person is engaged spiritually as to where they're coming from, so to speak. Okay, so now we're going to proceed on to the practice of hoodoo, because when I did some research in the past, there is a difference in the two. You have voodoo, which is the actual religion. You have hoodoo, which is a practice, in a sense. So I'm going to go on this website and to get some information about hoodoo. Okay, so hoodoo. Hoodoo is a set of spiritual practices, traditions, and beliefs which was created and concealed from slaveholders by enslaved Africans in North America. Hoodoo involved various traditional African religions and practices, and in the American South incorporated various elements of indigenous botanical knowledge. In the Gullah, South Carolina Low Country, hoodoo is known as Low Country voodoo. Hoodoo is an African diaspora tradition created during the time of slavery in the United States. Many of the practices are similar to other African diaspora traditions, such as Palo, Haitian voodoo, and Santeria, in that it includes communication with ancestors and spirits and healing rituals. Nevertheless, it differs from religions like Voodoo and Santeria in that there is no explicit canon of gods or deities that are worshipped. What makes these traditions similar is several of the practices come from the Bakongo people in Central Africa. During the transatlantic trade, about 40% of Africans taken to the United States were Bantu Congo. But Congo people were taken to other parts of the Americas during the slave trade, and Congo beliefs and practices influenced many African diaspora tradition. And I keep getting that word, so let me make sure I am pronouncing that word correctly. Because I have had that word to come up a couple of times, and let me make sure I am pronouncing that correctly. Diaspora. Okay. All righty. So says Hoodoo is a syncretic spiritual system that combines Christianity that was forced on enslaved Africans. Okay. And Islam brought over by enslaved Western African Muslim and spiritualism. Following the Great Migration of African Americans, Hoodoo spread throughout the United States. Practitioners of Hoodoo are called root workers, conjure doctors, conjure man or conjure woman, and hoodoo doctors. Regional synonyms for hoodoo include conjure or root work. So it says the first documentation of the word hoodoo in the English language appeared in 1870. Its origins are askew, but it's believed to originate in the alteration of the word voodoo, which its origins was Ewe and Fon languages of Ghana and Benin referred to divinity. So of course, when you go over a lot of the information that is listed on Wikipedia, it's going to be very, very extensive type of information. But let's see if I can get a little bit more information in terms of the actual practice, because it's giving some information regarding the origin of it and the types of people and where it originated from. But I wanted to go over the actual practice of the religion itself. So bear with me just one moment. Let's see.
Right.
Okay, so I'll go down a little bit further. It just goes over the different regions where it originated from, and some of them do actually use deities. I guess it's pretty much based on what region of a people, if you are talking in terms of voodoo as well as hoodoo, where the region of the people are in terms of their practices. Okay, so in a nutshell, it mentions that a lot of the African American practitioners use herbal practices in this religion by, going to herbal doctors that use knowledge of herbs to treat diseases such as heart disease, arthritis, cold, flu, and other illnesses. They will also go to these doctors to remove curses, evil spirits, and bring good luck. And sometimes there were, urban healing. They will use spiritual charms to help with treating chronic illnesses.
Specially marked boxes of Kellogg's cereal. Sing 2 in theaters December 22nd. Rated PG. Hey, Cover Girls. Remember that? I was a Cover Girl in 1988 and today I'm a Cover Girl. Thanks to Simply Ageless, America's #1 foundation for anti-aging. For instant wrinkle reduction, once a Cover Girl, always a Cover Girl. Simply Ageless for Cover Girl.
So I am going to go here because it goes into conjuring, how you can use God to conjure it. Whatever you deem it to be, ultimately is all God. You can call it whatever you choose to, whatever you give power to. So if this is what you say it is, then okay, but ultimately it's all under God. It mentions about using God as a conjurer, Moses as a conjurer. I'm gonna go down here to where it mentions about conjuring the spirit of High John. Moho within, it has a old African American hoodoo system, also discusses High John the Conqueror root and myth, as well as the nature of sack. In the African American folk stories, High John the Conqueror was an African prince who was kidnapped from Africa and enslaved in the United States. He was a trickster and used his wit and charm to deceive and outsmart his slaveholders. After the American Civil War, before High John the Conqueror returned to Africa, he told the newly freed slaves that if they ever needed his spirit for freedom, his spirit would reside in a root they could use. According to some scholars, the origin of High John the Conqueror may have originated from Africa, African male deities such as Elegua, who is a trickster spirit in West Africa. By the 12th century, white drugstore owners began selling High John the Conqueror products with the image of a white king on their labels, commercializing hoodoo. So it goes on to say that there was an author by the name of Zora Neale Hurston documented some history about High John the Conqueror from her discussions with African Americans in the South in her book, The Sanctified Church. Some African Americans believe High John the Conqueror freed the slaves and that President Abraham Lincoln in the Civil War did not believe did not bring freedom for blacks. According to one woman, Aunt Shady Ann Sutton, interviewed by Hurston, she said, as quoted here, these young Negroes read their books and talk about the war freeing the Negroes by Lord, a heap sees, but a few knows. Course, the war was a lot of help, but how come the war took place? They think they knows, but they don't. John the Conqueror had put it into the white folks to give us our freedom, is what she mentions. This author mentions who she questioned in regards to what happened during the time of, I guess the Emancipation Proclamation, which was written into place from or by Abraham Lincoln. So Ann Sutton and said that High John the Conqueror taught Black people about freedom and to prepare for their freedom in an upcoming war. The High John the Conqueror route used by African Americans prevented whippings from slave owners and provided freedom from chattel slavery. The route given to Frederick Douglass was a High John route that prevented Douglass from being whipped and beaten by a slave breaker. Former slave Henry Bibb used the High John route to protect himself by chewing and spitting the root towards his enslaver. So it goes on to mention about spirits, and it's very, very, very informative information. So I'm going down to the part where it goes over the practices because, as I mentioned, hoodoo is a practice. So it says the seeking process. In a process known as seeking, a hoodoo practitioner will ask for salvation of a person's soul in order for a Gullah church to accept them. A spiritual leader will assist in the process, and after believing the follower is ready, they will announce it in the church. A ceremony will commence with much singing and practicing of a ring shout. The word shout derived from the West African Muslim word salt, meaning dancing or moving around the Kaaba. The ring shout in Black churches originates from African styles of dance, counterclockwise circle dancing, and practicing is practiced in West and Central Africa to invoke the spirits of the ancestors and for spirit possession. The ring shout and shouting looks similar to African spirit possession. In Hoodoo, African Americans perform the ring shout to become touched or possessed by the Holy Spirit and to communicate with the spirits of dead ancestors. African Americans replace African spirits with the Christian God, Holy Spirit, during possession. In African American churches, this is called catching the spirit. African Americans use music, clapping, and singing during the ring shout and in modern day shouting in Black churches to bring down the spirit. The singing during the ring shout has Christian meaning using biblical references. During slavery, enslaved Africans were forced to become Christian, which resulted in a blend of African and Christian spiritual practices that shaped hoodoo. As a result, hoodoo was and continues to be practiced in some Black churches in the United States. In the Gullah Geechee Cultural his Heritage Corridor area, houses are places where African Americans gather to have church and perform healing rituals and the ring shout. The ring shout in hoodoo has its origins in the Congo region of Africa with the Congo cosmogram. During the ring shout, African Americans shuffle their feet on the floor or ground without removing their feet from the floor in order to create static electricity for the earth to connect with the spiritual energy of the earth. By connecting with the spiritual energy of the earth, they are also connected with the spirit of the creator because God created the earth. This is bringing down the spirit. Also, this is done to connect with ancestral spirits. This practice includes singing and clapping. The spiritual energy intensifies until someone is pulled into the center of the ring shout by that spirit that was brought down. This is done to allow spirit to enter and govern the ring. Researchers notice the African American ring shout looks similar to counterclockwise circles dances in West Africa. In West Africa, during a funeral, a counterclockwise circle dance is performed to send the soul to the ancestral realm, land of the dead, because energy and souls travel in a circle. This practice in West Africa continued in the Gullah Geechee nations, where the African Americans perform a ring shout over a person's grave to send their soul to the ancestral realm. In addition, the ring shout is performed for other special occasions not associated with death. The ring shout continues today in Georgia with the McIntosh County Shouters. In 2016, Vice News went to St. Helena Island, South Carolina, and interviewed African Americans in the Gullah Geechee Nation and recorded some of their spiritual traditions and cultural practices. Their recordings show African cultural and spiritual practices that survive in the Gullah Nation in South Carolina. The videos show a ring shout, singing, and other traditions. In addition, African Americans in South Carolina are fighting to keep their traditions alive despite gentrification of some of their communities. In 2017, the Smithsonian Institution interviewed African Americans and recorded the ring shout tradition practiced in the Gullah Geechee Nation in Georgia. The song sung during the ring shout and in shouting originated from their ancestors from Africa who replaced African songs and chants with Christian songs and biblical references. So it goes on, and the next information I'm going to go over is the Hoodoo Initiations. So again, in this seeking process in the hoodoo, accompanied the ring shout is also called initiation into hoodoo. African Americans in the Sea Islands, Gullah Geechee people, perform initiations of community members by combining West African initiation practices with Christian practices called seeking Jesus. Young people spent time in nature seeking Jesus and received guidance from Black religious leaders. The spiritual mothers of the African American community provided prophetic guidance to those seeking. After their initiations, initiates were accepted into the religious Black community. So this author, Zora Neale Hurston, wrote about her initiation into hoodoo in her book called Moles and Men, published in 1935. Hurston explained her initiation into hoodoo included wrapped snake skins around her body and lying on a couch for 3 days nude so she could have a vision and acceptance from the spirits. The spirits. In addition to lying on a couch nude wrapped in snake skins for her initiation, Hurston had to drink the blood of the hoodoo doctors who initiated her from a wine glass cup. There are other ways people become a hoodoo doctor. One is through a mentor under an apprenticeship, or they were born into a family of practitioners. Initiations are not required to become a hoodoo doctor or quote unquote root worker. So a lot of this information that is put on here, I don't know if a lot of this stuff is mockery or whatever the case may be, but I'm explaining to you in regards to that. I do feel as though when you begin to have a objective account or look on spirit and spirituality as to what that is. If you are demonically led, that means if you're not right in your temple, you know, in terms of the things you should and should not do in life. I mean, we're not perfect. We all are bound by this flesh. That's normal. But I feel as though it's possible, could very well be possible, something was going on with this particular author as to why they would tell her to actually drink the blood. She could have been very well nutritionally deficient. She could have very well been, low blood count, anemic, or something of that nature. Okay, as to why they would have asked her to do that. If she actually carried out and did that, the actual drinking of blood, it could very well mean that something was going on with her blood as such. Okay, so I wouldn't condone drinking blood. I'm just gonna be honest about it. I wouldn't condone drinking blood. Then someone can say, well, why would you eat animal products? That's a difference. It's a difference. I noticed in my personal journey, not to make this presentation all about me, because I am trying to present information in regards to voodoo and hoodoo. I noticed that a lot of things began to change in my life when I began to incorporate red meat into my diet. And I'm talking about, like, it seemed like things turned against me. And I can, I can tell you down to the year, which was, I want to say had to be back in 2007 or 8, somewhere along in there, when I began to incorporate like more red meats. I'm not talking about your average burger or something like that. I'm talking about like steaks and stuff like that. And that's when it became apparent to me that, a lot of these outside people are looking in, and they monitor it and they study and they watch what you do. And when you do anything to the contrary as to what they deem is right, they get mad because they're looking to get you, groom you, to perpetuate you into their little clique and want you to be the defining force for them and what they say you should be. So you'll be very surprised who is monitoring and who is studying you. It's the point. Okay. But that is my account on that in terms of, I also feel this way when I began to notice that a lot of, and this is not to discriminate against no particular one person or what have you, but the ones that likes to, the underground type of groups, that's the headbangers and things like that, get their lab work checked. Chances are, I can guarantee you, it's something nutritionally deficient within them. And particularly, it's going to be something regarding their blood work. When they talking about vampires and there's a craving for, blood and drinking blood, and could very well believe that these people have something going on with their blood. They could very well be folate, or iron deficient. Something nutritionally is going on with them. And you begin to understand that many of the times when people take on this quote unquote vegetarian or vegan diets, a lot of these people are starving to death. They're simply starving to death. It's because, of guilt, something that you have done, and something somebody has made you to feel guilty or shame about. So as a result, you feel the need to take on this diet. And essentially, they're not getting the proper nutrition for it. And it takes somebody who can see it objectively to make them aware of that. Because in your mind, you think you're doing right. There's nothing wrong with being vegan. There's nothing wrong with being vegetarian. But those type of diets are not conducive for everybody. Everybody can be on a vegan diet. And as I mentioned in the past, to a colleague of mine who is also a nurse, an older nurse, it depends on the day of the week as to if I'm gonna be vegan or if I'm going to be vegetarian, or I'm just gonna say the hell with it because I need to get my proteins and things in. Moderation. You want to be in moderation in all terms. There's nothing wrong with being vegan. You may want to get more of your proteins in a plant-based type of diet or bean. Don't get me wrong, I love beans. I can eat beans every day. But beans are not going to sustain me every day. It may be, I may not need to eat red meat all the time. I may need to eat it once a week, but ultimately moderation. So this is what the Spirit has revealed and has enlightened me on certain things that's going on. That's not to say, a lot of things that are wrong, but I do feel as though there is mockery and a test within a lot of these settings. And I'll leave it at that. So we're going to go a little farther. And I'm not going to go, because of course, when you go on to these websites and begin to research the information and stuff, this is going to be very, very extensive information. It is. So it mentions about, in hoodoo, personal concerns are used such as hair, nail clippings, blood, bones, other bodily fluids are mixed with ingredients for either a positive or negative effect. These items are placed inside conjure bags or jars and mixed with roots, herbs, animal parts, and graveyard dirt from a murderer's grave, and sometimes ground into a powder. The cursed items are buried under a person's steps to cause misfortune. To prevent from being fixed or cursed, it is considered a good idea to burn loose hair, combed or fallen from the head, so a conjurer cannot make a cursing powder from a person's hair. Placing personal concerns in containers and burying them to cause harm was found in West African countries of Nigeria and Benin. Okay, again, what are some of the things that are used to get DNA testing and as well as lab testing to test of substances and DNA and blood work? These are some of the similar things that you would take of a person, similar to a biopsy, to gain some insight and knowledge as to what is going on with this person. Now, this is not to judge, the religion, but this is my take objectively on this situation. Spiritual mediation, because oftentimes you will find this is God. This is the test. This is the test. This is God. Pay attention. The spirit mediation, the purpose of hoodoo was to allow people to access supernatural forces to improve their lives. Hoodoo is purported to help people obtain power or success. in many areas of life, including money, love, health, and employment. As in many other spiritual and medical folk practices, extensive use is made of herbs, minerals, parts of animal bodies, and individuals' possessions, candles, colored candles, incense, and other spiritual tools are used in hoodoo to bring healing, protection, love, and luck. For example, to prevent separation of a husband and wife, couples relied on root work and conjure. For example, or one example, documented in a slave narrative was to take a rabbit's forefoot, a lodestone, take 9 hairs from the top of the head and place all ingredients in a red flannel bag and bury it under the steps at the front door. To protect from conjure, a hole was punched through a dime and a string was inserted inside the hole and the dime was tied to the left ankle. Chickens are used in root work and conjure to find a work or spell a conjurer buried in the ground to cause misfortune. Let's see. In West Central Africa and the Gullah Geechee Nation in the South, Carolina and Georgia Low Country, chickens are free to roam the property as they have a natural spiritual ability to locate cursed items buried in the ground. And I do believe that because that's God letting you know that I can enlighten or put the spirit in whom I will to discover things, to make things apparent to you. If you simply pay attention, they are there for a reason. How hoodoo magic works is by working with the spirits of roots, herbs, insects, calling ancestors, and other spirits to activate the work for manifestation. Okay, contact with ancestors or other spirits of the dead is an important practice within the conjure tradition, and the recitation of songs from the Bible is also considered spiritually influential in hoodoo. Due to hoodoo's great emphasis on an individual's spiritual power to effect desired change in the course of events. Hoodoo's principles are believed to be accessible for use by an individual or a faith. Hoodoo practice does not require a formally designated minister. So these are things that many people can do, as indicated here. And let me just make sure that I'm continuing to go on as I approach the hour, and I will be coming to a close with this presentation. Offerings, the West and the Central African practice of leaving food offerings for deceased relatives and to feed the spirits, either ancestors, or petition other spirits that are not ancestors by giving them offerings of food, water, rum, continues in the practice of hoodoo. I have begun to incorporate some of these practices in my day-to-day life as well, and I'm going to tell you it works. It works. And once you do it, it will begin to make it apparent to you why you are doing that. Plain and simple. Providing spirits offerings of liberation empowers the spirits because it feeds them. Also, it honors the spirits by acknowledging their existence. So, as I mentioned, your loved ones that have passed, friends that have passed, anybody that you have been an accompaniment in this life experience that have lived on, their spirit still remains around, and they want you to acknowledge them and pay attention to them. They do. These offerings of food and liquids and the pouring of liberations or libations are left at grave sites or at a tree. This practice of offerings and libations is practiced in the Central African country of Gabon and other parts of Africa, and was brought to the United States during the transatlantic slave trade. So we're going to close out with animal sacrifice in regards to this hoodoo practice. Okay. So it says animal sacrifice is a traditional practice in Africa. It does as an offering to the spirits and also to ask a spirit to provide protection, healing, and other requests. When Africans were enslaved in the United States, the practice continued in voodoo and hoodoo. The animals that are sacrificed are chickens. In West Africa, among the Yoruba, blood sacrifices are left for issue and Elegba at the crossroads. The crossroads is a spiritual doorway to the spiritual realm where issue and Elegba resides. This practice was brought to the United States during the transatlantic slave trade, and the African Americans in the 20th century performed animal blood sacrifices at the crossroads. Ishu and Legba became the crossroads spirit or the man of the crossroads in hoodoo. In hoodoo, African sacrifice has become a rare practice in the African American community. However, animal sacrifice was documented in hoodoo even into the 19th century and into mid 20th century. For example, in hoodoo, animal sacrifices are sometimes done at the crossroads as an offering to the crossroads spirit and to ask the spirit or spirits for a request. At Stadville Plantation, located in Durham County, North Carolina, enslaved Africans performed animal sacrifice to call for spirits for assistance in the slave community. In 1883, in Alabama, a root worker sacrificed a chicken to leave a blood offering to the spirits to remove a spiritual work or spell. An African American man in North Carolina sacrificed a chicken at a crossroad, asking salvation from an epidemic from a disease that killed his farm animals. So the author Zora Neale Hurston recorded in her book Muse and Men an animal sacrifice of 9 black chickens in the 12th century. A hoodoo man named Turner in New Orleans, Louisiana, performed an African sacrifice for a client who wanted her brother-in-law to leave her home. Turner sat at his snake altar and meditated on his client's situation, and afterwards told Hurston to purchase 9 black chickens and some 4 thieves vinegar. Turner and Hurston performed a ritual, including the 9 black chickens and 4 thieves vinegar at night to ask the spirits and spirits of the chicken sacrifice for his client's brother-in-law to stop bothering her. The ritual included Turner dancing in a circle, swirling the chickens in his hand, and killed them by taking off their heads. And Hurston continued to beat the ground with a stick in order to produce a rhythmic sound in sync with Turner's dancing. Where the ritual took place, 4 thieves vinegar was poured onto the ground. In some African American spiritual churches, the sacrifice of live chickens to heal church members were practiced in a spiritual church in New Orleans by Mother Catherine Seals in the early to mid 20th century. So I did not go into too much details to give some clarity as to what was the reasoning behind that, but I do feel as though it was a reasoning in terms of you know, how you can keep somebody. Essentially, what I get from this is how you can keep from having somebody that does not have any jurisdiction or does not have no authority to come into your space. I guess that's objectively what I gather from reading that storyline or what this is talking about, like how you can set boundaries. The purpose of this is to set boundaries from those who don't know their place. Okay. So it goes on about divination. The use of divination in hoodoo originated from Africa practices in West and Central Africa. Divination was and is used to determine whether or what measures an individual or community should know that is important for survival and spiritual balance. Just like in Africa and in hoodoo, people turn to divination, seek guidance about major changes in their life. People seek an elder or a skilled diviner. This practice was brought to the United States during the transatlantic slave trade. So it says, there are several ways of going through it. I'm not going to go through all of this because, of course, as I mentioned, it is very, very extensive when you begin to go into hoodoo and its practices. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. But I will go down to for time purposes. Let's see. Hoodoo and the spiritual church movement. So it says the spiritual church movement in the United States began in the mid 19th century. The African American community was a part of this movement beginning in the early 20th century, and several spiritual churches were in African American communities. African Americans started independent spiritual churches as a way for them to hide their African practices from whites by synchronizing African traditions with the Christian faith. Some Black spiritual churches incorporated elements of hoodoo and voodoo practices. There were some spiritual churches documented by Zora Neale Hurston that incorporated hoodoo practices. A spiritual church in New Orleans led by an African American woman named Mother Catherine Seals performed hoodoo to heal her clients. Mother Catherine Seals healed a church member sacrificing a chicken by slitting it live and tied it to a person's leg for 2 days. This is a continued African tradition by using chickens to heal and conjure protection. Other African diaspora practices Mother Catherine Seals incorporated into her spiritual church was noted by the author Zora Hurston was Seals' reverence to a Haitian voodoo snake, Loa Spirit Dambala. A snake design was painted on a wall at Mother Seals Church. Another African American spiritual church leader had a plastic snake on his altar. Snake reverence among African Americans in voodoo and hoodoo originates from West Africa. An African American named Washington Doc Harrison founded the St. Paul Spiritual Holy Temple in Memphis, Tennessee. The spiritual church was nicknamed by the Blacks in the area as Voodoo Village. Although no actual voodoo took place inside of the spiritual church, however, hoodoo was practiced in the church. Doc Harris was known to make mojo bags that look similar to Congo-based McKinsey bundles, and he removed curses from people using hoodoo. Doc Harris built his church in a secluded area in the Black community so he and his family can practice their traditions in private. African Americans in spiritual churches blended African spiritual traditions and African spirits with Christianity, creating a uniquely African American religion. African American hoodoo religious uh, and spiritual leaders in spiritual churches did not refer to themselves as root workers or hoodoo doctors, but as spiritual advisors to avoid any negative attention from their community and local authorities. So hiding voodoo practices inside Black churches was necessary for African Americans because some people were lynched for practicing voodoo. In September 1901, the newspaper, the Chicago Tribune, reported 2 people were lynched for practicing hoodooism. Despite these circumstances, African American spiritual churches provided food and other services for the Black community. So I'm going to close it out in terms of voodoo and hoodoo. And I'm going to leave on a note. From research, and the research that I have researched out in regards to witchcraft, Wiccan, voodoo, and hoodoo, it is totally legal. As long as it's not done in means to hurt someone. As long as it's not done in terms of means to cause harm to another individual. Now, if it's used in a sense of protection, that is something, in my personal opinion, that I believe if you are trying to protect yourself, when there is real, like realistic danger, okay? I do believe that, but if you are someone who even practice witchcraft or Wiccan, hoodoo, voodoo, it is legal. Plain and simple, it's legal. Okay, so I am going to close out this presentation today, speaking on the religion of voodoo as well as the practice of hoodoo. It's a very interesting topic. If anybody have any questions, comments, questions, or concerns, you're more than welcome to comment on my Spreaker podcast, which is Spiritual Sense, or you can comment on my webinar for YouTube under my Spiritual Sense. Until then, you have a safe and wonderful day. Good day.